SMRs will soon play a crucial role in both growing our economy and improving our environmental performance. In my role as minister, I frequently reflect on my construction background. I would often say to customers, you have a choice. You can have it cheap, fast, and good, but you can only pick two. We could do this transition to carbon neutrality fast and cheap, but we know that means Albertans would suffer from brownouts or blackouts. We could do what is fast and good, but that would also mean expensive, spending billions upon billions of dollars in the transition. Or there is my preference, and certainly the preferred choice of Alberta's government, doing it right and affordably. And this is the responsible choice, ensuring the lights stay on and with a laser focus on economic impact. We also received a reminder this past weekend just how important the steps that you're taking are for the future of electricity in this province. As Alberta sunk into a deep freeze with temperatures pushing -40 and the wind stopped blowing, multiple grid warnings. This highlighted once again our need to ensure that we have the right electricity mix in this province to meet the growing demands. We believe that SMRs will play a strong role in that mix, and it is an honor to work with and serve those that have a similar vision for a vibrant and prosperous Alberta. Alberta's government is also excited about this transition and this future possibility.
We've seen over the past 2 days just the incredible strain that extreme weather has put on the grid here in Alberta. But it's also at these times when temperatures drop the way they have that access to energy is most important. While wind and solar can produce energy sometimes, it's critical that jurisdictions have the capacity to meet peak demand when they just don't show up. And here in Alberta, natural gas generation has been key to keeping the lights and heat on the past couple days. In Ontario, it's nuclear, and to a much smaller extent, natural gas that's doing the same job on a cold day like today. In Ontario, thanks to our nuclear fleet, we've actually been able to export thousands of megawatts of excess power from our natural gas fleet to New York and Michigan to help those jurisdictions meet the peak demand during the winter storms that they're experiencing now. This new partnership formed between Ontario Power Generation and Capital Power, it's going to signal not just to Canada, but really the world, that Canada continues to be the place to watch when it comes to new nuclear development. We understand just how important it's going to be for our future to have that source of safe, reliable, flexible, and affordable clean baseload electricity to help power our growth.
As Alberta's Minister of Energy and Minerals, I want all of you to know that our province supports SMR development. We are exploring exciting options for a regulatory framework to make sure that we bring clarity around the province's nuclear approach. Jurisdictions all over the world right now are pursuing SMRs as the demand for clean electricity and energy security grows. It becomes more and more evident every day as we see what's going on around the world. And SMRs truly have the potential to supply non-emitting energy in a number of different applications. In Alberta, there is a potential to use SMRs to decarbonize enhanced oil recovery and the critical minerals value chain. It is truly exciting.
That concludes the formal part of our agenda, and we would like to open the floor to questions.
David Staples from the Edmonton Journal. You say that the power demand in Alberta and the world is going to increase by 50%. I think the Premier has talked about it maybe even doubling the energy demand at least. Why are you looking at SMRs then and not a CANDU reactor for Alberta?
First of all, we operate 10 CANDU reactors. Bruce Power operates 8. NB Power operates 1. So we like the technology, but our decision to go with SMRs, and they are about 315 megawatts each, was really driven by the need to get to the M in an SMR, which is the modularization. So more and more of these being built in a factory, because they're smaller, they're better for certain grids that don't need 1,000 or 2,000 megawatts at a particular site. We don't exclude the large technologies. We love CANDU. We're extending them all now. So we're extending our Darlington site for 35 more years. Bruce Power is doing the same. But we think both technologies fit really well because of the way the system operates and the system demands. That's why we wanted to start on the SMRs. And I think they fit really well within the Alberta system, the Saskatchewan system, and others as well.
The construction time period for a large CANDU reactor versus the small modular reactors, it's a significant time difference in being able to put one of these on stream. Fitting this into a structure that the existing market can withstand, i.e. a 300 megawatt modular facility, is actually quite right-sized for the market that we have here, notwithstanding the growing demand.
What is the cost per each modular SMR?
We have not put out a cost yet. One of the things that we are working on with our first SMR build at Darlington is to get a license to construct, which we get from the nuclear regulator. That's where you go through and review all the technical specs and these types of things. That's expected to be early in the new year, so January or February of 25, so out a year. At that point, we will have sufficient information to be able to put out a cost number for all 4 units. First one's going to be a little bit more expensive. We know that. We're spending a lot of the cost to do that in Ontario, but we anticipate the other 3 being less. And we anticipate someone like Capital being able to utilize our learnings so that they get the benefit of a lower cost to build here. So I'd say cost number will be coming out in about a year's time, but we are very convinced that this is very competitive with wind, solar, batteries, or the combination of those. And like say on days like this past weekend, will actually work.
Which other energy systems does nuclear work best with? Does nuclear work well with natural gas, for instance? Does nuclear work well with something that is far more intermittent, like solar and wind? And what are the challenges in mixing in nuclear, which I understand runs best if it's running at capacity all the time?
The challenge isn't so much what the fuel type is. The challenge is how do you mix intermittent with dispatchable generation and ensure that the grid has the right construct to allow for the dispatchable plus the intermittent generation. So when we look across Canada, for example, the analysis is really about where is dispatchable generation coming from and what is the spread between base load, which is what's required all the time, and peaking capacity. So when we look at SMR, it's uniquely situated for a place like Alberta that is reliant on natural gas for baseload generation. Why? Because it heavily complements existing baseload generation.
Would this be something we'd be looking for, or Capital Power or your partnership to export? And would this just be exclusive to these 2 companies, the 2 partners?
We have an amazing supply chain in Canada. And it's allowed us to take our refurbishment of Darlington. It's a $12.8 billion project. And as I tell my boss, Minister Smith, we are nicely ahead of schedule. We're a little bit under budget, and that's unique for nuclear, but it is because our supply chain partners are so good.
The nuclear industry has been hampered in the past by opposition from groups like Greenpeace and from political parties. How worried are you that you might have a movement in Alberta, environmental movement against nuclear, or a political party that's elected which is against nuclear, and how is that factoring into your thinking?
Currently, the government of Alberta and the federal Liberal government have expressed great acceptance towards nuclear technology.
We've seen a real shift of public opinion when it comes to nuclear, particularly over the last couple of years as governments around the world are talking about net zero. You know, governments that have moved too fast on renewables or green energy that's intermittent have come to realize that we need to have non-emitting baseload if we intend to reach the targets that have been set by jurisdictions around the world. I think there's an understanding in those environmental groups that you referenced earlier as well that if we want to hit the targets that they've set, you have to have baseload non-emitting power. And it's really nuclear that provides that. Hydroelectric can provide it, but we're limited in the number of resources that we have across the country and around the world. There are some jurisdictions that simply can't provide the type of baseload that you would get from hydroelectric. So nuclear is it. We've had great support from the federal government, the development of investment tax credits to support new nuclear builds, support through the Canada Infrastructure Bank for that first small modular reactor that we're building at Darlington, almost $1 billion from the CIB to support the work on that project, and support for the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission as well in a budget a couple of years ago from the federal government. I believe it was $50 million for the CNSC to be able to beef up the regulatory work that's required in order to site these small modular reactors, not just the ones that we're building in Ontario, but in Alberta and Saskatchewan and potentially New Brunswick as well, and the CNSC's leadership role worldwide in being the trusted regulator. We have non-nuclear jurisdictions like Poland and some others, Estonia, that are looking at deploying nuclear for the first time, that are really looking at the CNSC to train the regulators in that jurisdiction and to set up the framework as well for citing these SMRs in their jurisdiction. So I think there's been a dramatic shift in opinion from environmental groups and certainly the federal government when it comes to nuclear as well. Brian?
Thanks, Todd. And just I would say this, that the governments have to do the work. They have to consult properly, they have to listen properly, and they have to educate. Education is part of it. The nuclear situation has changed a lot over the last decades, and you have a world-class operator. People should have the confidence that they need to move forward, but we need to make sure that we do our job as a government to consult properly and to educate properly and to listen.
The work that's been happening at OPG and at Bruce, particularly on the refurbishment projects that are underway, keeping in mind these are multi-billion-dollar projects. The last number of reactors that have been returned to service after refurbishment haven't just come in on budget. They've come in the latest cases, 6 months ahead of schedule. And how many infrastructure projects have you heard about that far ahead of schedule and on budget in the last number of years? It's nuclear and the professionals that work in our nuclear sector in Ontario that have done the work to make sure that there were contingency plans in place to deal with every outcome you could possibly imagine when it comes to these massive, massive projects. It's that kind of professionalism in Ontario that's allowed us to have the comfort as policymakers to move forward on the small modular reactor, the next generation of new nuclear for not just Canada, but for the world. So I have to give full marks to the folks who work in our sector in Ontario now, and who will be working in jurisdictions like Saskatchewan and Alberta and New Brunswick in the years to come.
Thank you for joining us. We wish you good warm days. The media scrum regarding the weekend grid alerts will be held just outside this ballroom.